The year was 1944 and the world was consumed by the chaos of World War II. But our 5-year-old Jerry Brudos was excitedly going through the garbage cans. He soon came across a perfect pair of high heels with rhinestones. He would take his treasure home with him to play. Once home, Jerry would proudly wear the shoes and walk around the room to display it to his mother. His mother, in turn, would freak out, tear the shoes from him, and burn them. She would then go on to call him wicked. Born on January 31, 1939 in South Dakota, Jerry Brudos would go on to murder 4 women in a span of just 2 years. His act turning more gruesome with each victim, which includes severed foot in a freezer, severed breast in epoxy, necrophilia, pulleys, and using electricity to reanimate the corpses. But how did he get here? What happened? This is the story of Jerry Brudos, also called the Lust Killer or the Shoe Fetish Slayer. Like almost all serial killers, Jerry Brudos came from a dysfunctional family. His mother was expecting a little girl, and when fate gave her little Jerry, she hated him. She would constantly reject and abuse him while doting on her eldest son, James. Jerry experienced his only maternal love in a kind old woman. He would pretend she was his mother and spend his time with her. Unfortunately, she would soon die of diabetes. Jerry then befriended a girl his own age. She's probably the only real friend he had. But with Jerry's luck, she died of tuberculosis soon after. These 2 people were the only significant people in his life until he met his wife when he was in his 20s. Even though his mother burned his shoes, or maybe because of it, Jerry Brudos became obsessed with high heels. And as the years progressed, his obsession would branch out to include lingerie, tight skirts, and clingy sweaters. He would steal all these artifacts and hide it in his room. But when he turned 16, just owning stolen goods was not enough. Jerry Brudos wanted more. At 16, Jerry would lure girls his own age or younger to a barn nearby at knife point. Once inside, he would force them to disrobe and take pictures of them. He would then lock the girls in the corn crib and disappear. Several minutes later, he would appear in a different shirt and a different hairstyle, explaining that he's Ed, Jerry's twin. He would be shocked when the girls recount what happened to them just a few minutes ago. He would explain that Jerry was mentally ill and plead with the girls not to go to the authorities, and promise them that he would destroy the camera and all the photographs. We will never know if the girls believed him or were just too scared, but none of them actually went to the police. On April of 1956, Jerry and a 17-year-old girl was on a date in a deserted road. Once they were alone, he demanded her to undress. She refused. Jerry then proceeded to drag her out of the car and hit her, breaking her nose. A young couple driving by heard the commotion and intervened. Jerry tried to lie about the situation, but the couple drove them to the nearest police station. He was arrested for assault and battery. Investigators went on to search his bedroom, where they found his secret stash of Polaroids. They identified one of the victims from the pictures and interrogated her. She would tell them about her assault and also about Ed, Jerry's twin. In light of this new information, Jerry was taken into custody to be referred to the Polk County Juvenile Department. Since he was 17 years old, Brudos was treated as a juvenile offender and sent to undergo psychiatric evaluations within the Oregon State Hospital. He entered this facility on April 16, 1956, where he remained for 9 months. After a range of evaluations, he was diagnosed with depression and schizotypal personality disorder. Over the years, Jerry would follow and assault women on different occasions and steal their footwear, but he was never caught. In March 1959, Brudos joined the army, where he trained as a communications technician. Although he became highly skilled in this profession, on October 1959 he was discharged from military after being classified as psychologically unfit for military services. He moved back into his parents' house in Oregon and soon started working at a local radio station as an electrical engineer. In 1960, he would strangle a woman to semi-consciousness and flee with her shoes. A year after that, he met Raffine and got married to her on September 30, 1961. They had a pretty good marriage, with Raffine indulging in her husband's inclination to photographing her while she walked around the house in lingerie and high-heeled shoes. However, after she gave birth to their first child, Teresa, Ruffin was too busy and tired to keep up the playful sex. This led Brudos to retire to his basement, where he would be consumed in his infantile fantasies. There were two incidents that could have triggered the murders. At the radio station, he was severely injured and lost consciousness in an electrocution accident that nearly killed him. Those who knew him observed that Jerry was never quite the same after that. And shortly after that accident, his second child was due to be born. Brudos had planned to hold his wife's hand and wipe her brow while she gave birth, but at the last minute he was rebuffed by his wife. He felt rejected and abandoned by a significant female in his life, yet again. Shortly after that, the killings began. So on January 26, 1968, Jerry Brudos was working in his yard when a young 19-year-old Linda Catherine Slauson entered his property. She was a door-to-door encyclopedia saleswoman from Aloha, Oregon. She was actually going to his neighbor's house to sell the books, but she confused the address and entered Brudos' property by mistake. Brudos then convinced her that he was interested in purchasing her encyclopedia and lured her into his basement. He then bludgeoned her on the head with a section of wood, then manually strangled her to death before concealing her body beneath the staircase to the basement. All of this was happening while his mother and daughter were in the house. So once he got rid of them, he would engage in acts of necrophilia with Slauson's body while dressing her in various footwear and lingerie that he had collected over the years. He would also go on to photograph the process. Jerry Brudos severed Lawson's left foot and retained it in the basement freezer for future use. He would also keep 2 encyclopedias as a keepsake. Lawson's body was then bound to a heavy cylinder head and discarded over a rail somewhere in Marion County. Brudos could not recall the precise location. On the night of November 26, 1968, Jerry Brudos was driving home from work when he saw 3 people standing over a broken-down Rambler alongside Interstate 5. Among them was Jane Susan Whitney, a 23-year-old motorist with 2 hitchhikers that she had given a ride to. Brudos inspected her car and convinced her that he can fix it, but he had to go back home to get the tools. He then dropped the 2 hitchhikers to their destination and took Whitney home with him. Once there, he went to collect the tools, leaving her in the passenger seat. He then sneakily entered the back of the car and asked Whitney to close her eyes and describe how to tie a shoelace without opening her eyes or moving her hands. As Whitney was doing what he asked, he used a leather luggage strap to strangle her. He then proceeded to essay her in the car and then carry her to his garage. Similar to Slauson, he would dress her in his collection of footwear and lingerie as he photographed her and engaged in acts of necrophilia. Jerry Brudos was getting more violent because this time he proceeded to hoist Whitney's body from the ceiling using a pulley. He kept her body suspended for 2 days, engaging in necrophilia whenever he felt like it. He also severed her breast to use it as a paperweight, but the epoxy hardener he used failed to fully set. So he had the brilliant idea of stuffing the breast with sawdust and pinning it to a wooden board. So 2 days after the murder, a car crashed into his garage, knocking a hole in the wall. A policeman came to inspect the damages, while Whitney's body was suspended from the ceiling. However, because of dust, debris, and darkness, he did not see the mutilated body. So that evening, Jerry Brudos tied her body to a scrape of railroad iron and threw it into Willamette River along with Slauson's severed foot, which is starting to decompose. In March 27, 1969, Brudos saw a young woman in high-heeled shoes and miniskirt. He then parked his station wagon and followed her, but soon lost sight of her. When he came back to his vehicle, he ran into Karen Elena Sprinker, a 18-year-old Oregon State University chemistry student. He abducted her at gunpoint and took her home with him. Brudos would proceed to essay her in his workshop and force her to pose in various high-heel shoes and underwears as he photographed her. Brudos would then bind Sprinker's hands behind her back and kill her by hanging her from the ceiling. He also severed her breasts to form plastic molds. Later that evening, Brudos would lash Sprinker's body to 6-cylinder engine component and threw her in the Willamette River. In April of 1969, Brudos tried to abduct 2 women, but thankfully was not successful. There was a 24-year-old motorist, Sharon Wood. Brudos tried to abduct her at gunpoint at a parking garage in Portland, but she'd resist him by kicking and biting him. In all this commotion, Brudos slammed her head against the concrete floor, and fled the scene. The very next day, Brudos met Gloria Smith, a 15-year-old school student, and forced her at gunpoint to follow him to his vehicle. While they were walking, Gloria sees a woman working on her front lawn. She yells and runs towards this woman. Brudos fled the scene. In April 23, 1969, Linda Dawn Sally, a 22-year-old removal firm secretary, was buying gifts for her fiancé from the mall and returning to her vehicle when she was approached by Brudos. He had a fake police badge with him and informed her that she was being arrested for shoplifting. Although Sally denied the accusations, she followed him to his car. Once they reached the car, she was informed that she was being kidnapped for ransom instead. Now, Brudos believed that his wife and children were with relatives, so he ordered Sally to follow him to his home across the yard. At that very moment, his wife appeared on the porch asking him to come for dinner. But his wife did not see Sally behind her husband, which could have been because of the garage layout. So Brudos would tie Sally in the garage and join his family for dinner. When he returned to the garage, Sally had fled herself but had not escaped. He would tie a leather strap to her neck and pull her off her feet until she was unconscious. He proceeded to essay her and strangle her to death. Similar to Whitney and Springer, Sally was hung by the neck using the same workshop pulley. However, this time, Brudos used hypodermic needles into her ribcage beneath her armpit to run an electrical current to animate her. You probably think he wanted to bring her to life, but he just wanted to make some dancing or seizure-like symptoms. But the experiment only singed her flesh at the point of entry. He left the experiment and created a mold of her breast instead. After 24 hours, he bound her body to a vehicle gearbox and discarded her in Willamette River. He had not mutilated her body. On May 10, 1969, 2 fishermen were fishing in Long Tom River when they found a bound and bloated body of a young woman. The body was of Linda Sally. Due to the extent of decomposition, they could not determine if she was assayed, but they did rule her death as being due to strangulation. The autopsy also revealed needle marks encircled by burning on each side of her ribcage. Karen Springer's body was discovered 2 days later, 20 yards from Sally's. Her body was bound by the same cord and copper wire as Sally's. The autopsy determined that she had died of smothering or strangulation. Both her breasts were severed from her body after death, and she was wearing a bra many sizes too large with brown paper toweling to simulate larger breasts. Now, during that time, there was a man claiming he was a Vietnam veteran who would ask Springer's fellow students at Oregon State University on dates. Almost all of them would refuse, but there was this one girl who felt pity for him and went on a date. The date was very unpleasant, with him making comments about the dead bodies found in the Long Tom River. She never wanted to meet him again. The investigators, however, suspected this man and convinced her to agree to one more date so that they can catch him. So she agreed on a date, and the authorities arrested him when he was on his way to meet her. This man was Jerry Brudos. Brudos gave the correct name, age, and occupation but wrong address. He had to be released as there were no legal basis to keep him. The investigators would then go on to collect enough evidences to obtain a search warrant of Brudos' property. They would go through his property on May 26, 1969. They would find his stash of high heels, lingeries, and all the pictures he took of the deceased. In one picture, a deceased woman was hoisted on the pillow, and there was a mirror laid horizontally beneath her feet, which caught the reflection of Brudos taking the picture. A severed female breast coated with epoxy was also found upon a mantel in the living room. There were numerous engine components scattered across the garage, and the copper wire that matched the ones found with the body were retrieved from his garage. Gloria Smith would also identify Brudos as the man who tried to abduct her. Initially, Brudos denied all allegations, but by early June, he gave full confession of all 4 murders. Jerry Brudos was formally charged with the murders of Whitney, Springer, and Sally on June 4, 1969. When he entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, several doctors unanimously concluded that he was sane and thus competent to stand trial. On June 27, 1969, 3 days before his trial, Brudos formally entered a plea of guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder before Marion County Circuit Court. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive terms of life imprisonment with possibility of parole to be served in Oregon State Penitentiary. However, family members of his victims repeatedly attended his scheduled parole hearings in which they requested he remain incarcerated for the duration of his life. Brudos would spend the remainder of his life in prison. Even though he confessed to all 4 murders, he was never tried for the murder of Linda Slauson due to insufficient real evidence. Although Brudos had retained photographs of her lower legs, ankles, and feet, he had not photographed other areas of her body after death. The photographs could not be proven to be taken in life or death. While in prison, he was permitted to order mail order catalogs depicting women modeling high-heel shoes and underwear. As a convicted sex offender, Brudos is known to have endured several physical assaults by fellow inmates. Brudos died of liver cancer while incarcerated within the Oregon State Penitentiary on March 28, 2006. We can only hope he experienced the worst symptoms of liver cancer while alive. At the time of his death, he was 67 years old and the longest incarcerated inmate in the Oregon Department of Corrections, having served a total of almost 37 years imprisonment. So that's the story of Jerry Brudos, the lust killer or the shoe fetish slayer.